In the heart of Billings, Montana, there is a brave little church in the neighborhood. Bethlehem Lutheran. It's been here as this neighborhood has grown up, quietly inviting people to come. But what sort of place is this? And what do the people do there? And how did it come to be here in the first place? In Billings after World War II, the city was growing, and the Synod of the Northwest of the United Lutheran Church in America was interested in building churches to keep up with the needs of a growing population. Reverend H.J. Motzkus was sent to Billings to canvass and survey the neighborhoods in the southwest edges of the city to find any Lutherans who might be living there.
Due to the transient character of Billings, I thought it best to re-canvass the entire territory, house to house and street by street.
An earlier canvass of the area had included neighborhoods which, by agreement, belonged to American Lutheran Church. This survey had found many unchurched Lutherans living in the area, but they were considered out of bounds by the agreement. Instead, Reverend Motzkus found other families from non-Lutheran backgrounds who were still interested in forming a church.
No matter, this venture is going to be strictly missionary, without any transfers whatever from the three Lutheran churches here. Thus, gradualism, rather than mushrooming, will characterize the development of this mission.
Reverend Motzkus noted that the plan was for Billings to extend west along the old Cemetery Road, now being called Central Avenue.
There is a definite building trend out this way, so there is a definite future to go on for a long-range development of a congregation. While there is a thin sprinkling of tradespeople and white-collar workers, this is predominantly a laboring class section.
At first, Reverend Motzkus hoped to use the public school as a meeting place, but found that the school, while friendly, had a policy of not lending its space out to any religious groups. Then, he located a house which could be used for worship by the first members.
It is scarcely adequate, at the most seating about 40, but it gives us a chance to get going.
However, that deal fell through. Reverend Motzkus was desperate to get this new community up and running with a place to worship, so he accepted the offer of an abandoned stable on Central Avenue. The goal was to hold the first service on May 8, 1949. A letter from the Synod president was supportive and encouraging.
It has been demonstrated over and over again in Lutheran home missions that it is a spirit that counts. The place is of secondary importance. The conversion of the stable into a meeting place of the church is a demonstration of the right spirit in missionary and people.
A man who was hired to remove old manure from the stable ended up engaged in another commitment in Denver. Reverend Motzkus raced to find volunteers and professionals to get this done so the concrete floor could be poured. The stable was painted and furnished with used worship supplies donated by other ULCA churches. A tent was set up as a Sunday school classroom. Reverend Motzkus sent a letter of invitation out to the whole neighborhood announcing, "A church is born." Initial services were also advertised in the Billings Gazette. The morning of May 8th came. Worshippers gathered and celebrated Jubilate Sunday, the traditional name for the third Sunday after Easter. The organist was Mrs. Gustav Simmons, who played Holy, 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 the church's one foundation, and Beautiful Savior. There was also a special address from Dr. D.L. Downing from Minneapolis, Superintendent of Home Missions for the Northwest Synod. Worship was held at 11 o'clock after Sunday school at 9:45. Reverend Motzkus fell ill that summer, and a replacement missionary, Paul Gerberding, had to come and continue organizing the community. By December 18, 1949, the congregation was ready to be incorporated into the ULCA. On dedication day, 51 adults became charter members. A large number of children also accompanied these charter members. Also, a banquet was held celebrating Bethlehem's incorporation, a tradition which was repeated on many subsequent anniversaries. A boardwalk was completed to the street, along with a sign to alert passerby of Bethlehem's presence. In 1950, Bethlehem called its first regular pastor, Pastor Robert A. Bartles. He accepted the call, and on April 18th he was installed, right after the congregation erected a steeple on the old stable. Still, it was clear that this new congregation needed a larger and more permanent building. That summer, a building committee was organized, and for the next 2 years, Bethlehem worked to find a location, draw up plans, and begin excavation and building. Bethlehem members contributed volunteer labor to the building each evening after their day jobs. At times, it seemed like new members were God-sent because of their professions: carpenters, contractors, construction workers, a furnace man, a roofer. They worked under the direction of a contractor, and one night even nailed beer cans to the frame to prove to the boss that they had actually accomplished something that night. On August 3, 1952, Bethlehem members began worship in the old barn and processed across the street to the new building, with council members lining the front sidewalk. The men of the church continued to work on the building until it was ready to be dedicated on December 28th. In 1956, Pastor Bartles resigned to answer a call to become an instructor at Northwestern Lutheran Theological Seminary. A call was extended on July 1st to Bethlehem's second pastor, Reverend Donovan Myers. In December 1959, Bethlehem celebrated its 10-year anniversary at the YMCA with a cake shaped just like the church building. Pastor Myers' call was cut short by dissension caused by cliques in the congregation. Pastor Ronald Moen was called in 1962, and Pastor Myers left to become a chaplain in the Navy. Sunday school enrollment had risen to 220 children, and the need was felt for expanded education space. In 1964, Bethlehem's 15th anniversary, they completed construction of a new education wing and saw a record vacation Bible school class of 259. With the building completed in pretty much the same basic shape it holds today, life went on in the congregation, with worship, community activities, and new generations coming to faith in Jesus Christ. The 60s also saw kids who had grown up at Bethlehem become pastors, like Pastor Tom Blevins, ordained at Bethlehem in 1969. In 1967, Pastor Moen left to answer a call to Hope Lutheran in Linden, Washington, and a dynamic young new pastor came to Bethlehem, Pastor Gail Estergreen. He and his young family set a tone which could carry Bethlehem through the cultural changes of the late 1960s and 70s. The congregation offered worship in the middle of the week on Thursdays and experimented with new styles in music. And throughout the 70s, new members would come to shape this community of faith, many faces that are still active members today. In 1974, Bethlehem celebrated its 25th anniversary, and another child of Bethlehem, Charles Sider, was ordained into ministry. And still more children grew up and were confirmed into the Christian faith. In 1976, Pastor Estergreen resigned, and Pastor Robert Osman agreed to fill the vacancy temporarily, which ended up meaning 8 years. His prudent financial expertise kept Bethlehem together in a time of declining membership and rising costs. In 1984, Pastor Doug Kemp came to serve Bethlehem with his wife Deirdre, who was born in Northern Ireland. They highlighted the troubles in Northern Ireland by hosting 2 Irish girls, one Catholic, one Protestant, through a vacation program established by a California nonprofit. The 80s also saw some building changes and renovations. A cross tower, designed by Scott Peterson, was installed, and stained glass windows added new beauty and new meaning to the sanctuary. Perhaps the window in Bethlehem's sanctuary, a word made flesh, best describes what Bethlehem is all about. God's story is given flesh in a particular place and a particular time. Successive pastors have come to Bethlehem, Pastor Susan Hahn in 1993, and Pastor Eric Thorson in 2004. Bethlehem answered changing times with a bold new decision to donate a portion of the building to a new ministry for homeless families, the Interfaith Hospitality Network, forming new friendships and finding a way to be faithful even as a small church. But like the Synod President said when Bethlehem was formed, the spirit is what counts. The place is of secondary importance. Bethlehem is the Word made flesh in this little corner of the planet, in this neighborhood, at this time. Bethlehem's story is a story of Jesus Christ coming in bread and wine, coming in the proclaimed Word, alive in our worship and in our song, alive in the gathered people. Bethlehem is a story of people who come to this community and make it theirs, people who find a home for their faith in this place. Bethlehem is a story of friendship and play, when people freed by the gospel can delight in each other's company. Bethlehem is a story of people learning to do ministry and care for each other and their community. Bethlehem is the story of a place, a home for the brightest and best moments of people's lives. And it's the story of the faithful work and service of the people who give their time, energy, and resources to make it all happen, to ensure that this church will be there for the next anniversary, for their children, for the next new faces to walk through the door. It's the story of hospitality cooked up in church kitchens and potluck suppers. The story of leaders in church councils. Bethlehem is a Word made flesh in water, as Christ meets us in the water of baptism. It's a Word made flesh as children and their families hear the story for the first time. It's a Word made flesh as young people take ownership of this story and this faith and say that they believe. Bethlehem, 60 years of gathering, celebrating, mourning, and laughing, proclaiming, hearing, being fed on Christ's grace, and serving. The church born in a humble stable retains that character of being an unexpected, easily overlooked, surprising place to find God's grace. Bulletins in the first summer of worship said, "Strangers and visitors heartily welcomed." Today we say, all are welcome, and do our best to mean it.